chairman pala. Ready na ako. Excited, excited. Importante matama.
Exactly. Kaya dati, di ba tayo nung nagpa-practice tayo, parang hindi yata ganito dapat kasi pinadali ng influencer. Parang hindi yata makita. Ano, di ba? Marami. Yung akala, pakpak, gawa.
Ang constitution, statutes, it can be amended.
I-amend it. Hindi naman yung practical constitution. Anong sabi sir? Nasa school pa?
Continuation.
So, kung mag-huli, pwede na din mag-practice. Okay lang kung nasa rules na siya. Ang clear kung
Ano
nasa.
ngayon? Ano lang? Death penalty? Death penalty na tayo.
Oh, just review mo lang. Yun lang po ang schedule.
Yun lang. Sus!
Sabi mo po.
Ninervous ako.
Dalawang
Session is now called to order. Everybody is requested to please rise for the singing of the national anthem.
Bayang magiliw, perlas ng silanganan, alam ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiging, sa manlulupig, di ka masisingil, sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong baghaw, may nilang ang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nanginginig, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pang may magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng walang pagsinta, buhay ay langit sa ating mo. Aming ligaya na pag may mamapit, at mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Please remain standing for a minute of silent prayer and meditation. Thank you. Majority Leader.
Good afternoon, Madam Speaker. I move for suspension.
Session suspended. Session resumed.
Madam Speaker, I move that we call the roll of members.
The Secretary is directed to call the roll of members.
Roll call of members, honorable representatives. Abad. Abaya. Abayon. Abillanosa. Abu. Abueg. Acharon. Akop. Acosta. Acosta Alba. Adjong. Advincula. Agaraw. Agabaw. Aglipay Bilyar. Albano. Alcala. Aliano. Almario. Almonte. Alonte. Alvarez Franz. Alvarez Mercedes. Alvarez Pantaleon. Amante. Amatong. Andaya. Angara Castillo. Antonino. Antonio. Aragones. Arbizon. Arcillas. Arenas. Atienza. Aumentado. Bagaw. Bagaching. Bagilat. Banal. Barbers. Barsaga. Batawil. Batucabe. Bautista Bandigan. Belaro. Belmonte Feliciano. Belmonte Jose Christopher. Belmonte Ricardo. Benitez. Bernos. Bertiz. Biason. Billones. Biron. Bulilia. Bondok. Bordado. Bravo Anthony. Bravo Maribida. Brosas. Bulot Bigtang. Cagas. Calderon. Calixturbiano. Caminero. Campos. Canama. Cari. Casilaw. Castelo. Castro Franz. Castro Fredinil. Catamco. Cayetano. Celeste. Seravica. Cerilles. Chavez. Chipeco. Co. Cobanco. Juliantes. Cortés. Cortuna. Cosalan. Crisologo, Cuba, Quaresma, Cueva, Dalipe, Dalog, Dasa, De Jesus, De Venecia, De Vera, Defensor, Del Mar, Del Rosario, De Losa Montalia, De Maporo Abdullah, De Maporo Khalid, Duavit, Durano, Di, Ilago, Enverga, Erice, Rigel, Ermita Buhain, Escudero, Espina, Espino, Estrella, Eusebio, Ibardone, Fariñas, Fernando, Ferrer Juliet, Ferrer Luis, Ferriol, Floirendo, Flores, Fortun, Fortuno, Fentebella, Garbin, Garcia Gwendolyn, Garcia Jose, Garcia Albano, Gary Richard, Gary Sharon, Gasataya, Gachalian, Heron, Guana Cristina, Gornulpo, Gomart, Gomez, Gonzaga, Gonzales Alexandria, Gonzales Aurelio Dong, Gonzales Fernando, Goriseta, Gulias, Hernandez, Herrera D, Hofer, Palusos, Javier, Ko, Konghun, Labad-Labad, Lacson, Lagman, Lanete, Laugan, Lasatin, Liachon, Lee, Lim Kay Chong, Lobrigat, Lopez Benur, Lopez Carlo, Lopez Manuel, Loyola, Macapagal Arroyo, Maceda, Madrona, Malapitan, Manalo, Mangawang, Magudodato Suarto, Magudodato Sajid, Marcoleta, Marcos, Mariño, Marquez, Martinez, Matugas, Miliana, Mending, Mendoza, Mercado, Mirasol, Montoro, Nava, Nieto, Noel, Nograles Jericho, Nograles Carlo, Nolasco, Nunez Maleñaon, Waminal, Ocampo, Olivares, Ong Edwin, Ong Henry, Ortega Pablo, Ortega Vini, Pacquiao, Paduano, Palma, Pancho, Panganiban, Panotes, Papandayan, Pichay, Pimentel, Pineda, Plaza, Primicia Sagabas, Kimbo, Radasa, Ramirez Sato, Ramos, Relampagos, Revilla, Roapuno, Robes, Rocamora, Rodriguez Isidro, Rodriguez Maximo, Roman, Romero, Romualdez, Romualdo, Roque Ari, Roque Roelio, Sakdalan, Sagarbaria, Sahali, Salceda, Salimbangon, Salo, Salon, Sambar, Sandoval, Santos Recto, Sarmiento Cesar, Sarmiento Edgar, Sevillano, Sema, Xiao, Silverio, Singson, Swansea Estrelita, Swansea Horacio, Suarez, Si Alvarado, Tambunting, Tan Angelina, Tan Milagrosa, Tan Cherny, Tejada, Teves, Chanco, Ting, Tiño, Tolentino, Treñas, Tugna, Tupas, Turabi Nataman, Ti, Umali, Unabia, Ungab, Unico, Uy Juliet, Uy Rolando, Uy Bareta, Vargas, Vargas Alfonso, Vilarde, Velasco, Velasco Catera, Veloso, Vergara, Villapuerte, Villanueva, Villarasa Suarez, Villarica, Villarin, Vilago, Yap Artur, Yap Milesio, Yap Victor, Yu, Zamora Mara Carmen, Zamora Ronaldo, Sarate, Subiri. Madam Speaker, the roll call shows that 224 members responded to the call.
With 224 members responding to the call, the chair hereby declares a quorum. Majority Floor Leader.
Madam Speaker,
Madam
I move-
Speaker,
May we know, Madam
Majority
Speaker,
Floor
what is
Leader.
the pleasure of the gentleman from Buhay?
yes, thank you, Mr. Majority Floor Leader. We just would like to point out that although we have a quorum, clearly we have a quorum, but there are only 216 on the floor and not 220 that the Secretariat has confirmed. So again, we are pointing it out. Their count seems to be inaccurate again. Although very near to the truth, 220 as against 220, 216 and 220, but it is not accurate. Thank you.
Thank you. Majority Floor Leader.
In any event, Madam Speaker, we have to rely on the count of the Secretariat. Madam Speaker, I move that we approve Journal number 72, for the session on February 20, 2017.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Journal number 72 of session on Monday, February 20, 2017 is hereby approved. Majority Floor Leader.
Madam Speaker, I move that we take up reference of business and bills on first reading. And for this purpose, kindly direct the Secretary General to read the titles and the numbers of the measures and such other matters.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved. The Secretary General is directed to read the bills and resolutions on first reading for the referral to the appropriate committees.
Reference of business, bills on first reading, House Bill 5033, establishing a separate schools division office in the city of Canlaon or Negros Oriental, Representative Lim Kay Chong.
To the Committee on Basic Education and Culture.
House Bill 5034, establishing a special economic zone in the municipality of Placer, Masbate, Representative Lanete.
To the Committee on Trade and Industry and the Committee on Economic Affairs.
House Bill 5035, naming the Kalibu, Banga, Baliti, Batan, Altabas National Road into Congressman Allen Salas Quimpo National Highway, Representative Marquez.
To the Committee on Public Works and Highways.
House Bill 5036, punishing harassment or exploitation of families, Representative Campos, Del Rosario, several others.
To the Committee on Revision of Laws.
House Bill 5037, creating separate engineering district in the city of Antipolo, Representative Ako.
To the Committee on Public Works and Highways.
House Bill 5038, granting universal social pension to senior citizens, Representative Batocabe, Garbin and Co.
To the Committee on Population and Family Relations.
House Bill 5039, upgrading the service capacity of the Hospital ng Parañaque, Representative Bolivares.
To the Committee on Health.
House Bill 5040, creating the province of Zamboanga Hermosa, Representative Matong.
To the Committee on Local Government.
House Bill 5041, regulating the imposition of fees for the use of parking spaces, Representative Barbers.
To the Committee on Trade and Industry.
House Bill 5042, creating the Philippine National Transportation Safety Board, Representative Garcia Gwendolyn.
To the Committee on Government Reorganization and the Committee on Transportation.
House Bill 5043, amending Republic Act 7160, Representative Garcia Gwendolyn.
To the Committee on Local Government.
House Bill 5044, establishing a specialized tested skills development center, Representative Relampagos.
To the Committee on Higher and Technical Education.
Resolutions, House Solution 786, urging the PhilHealth to review its healthcare policies, Representative Lanete.
To the Committee on Health.
House Solution 787, direct the Committee on Transportation to exercise its oversight functions and investigate the Metro Rail Transport Corporation General Manager Engineer Deo Leo and Manalo, Representative Nograles Jericho.
To the Committee on Rules.
House Solution 788, urging the DPWH to conduct an audit of the structural integrity and reliability of buildings in Metro Manila, Representative Castelo.
To the Committee on Rules.
House Solution 789, calling on the House to consider the creation of a capital defense unit, Representative Campos, Del Rosario, and Bravo Anthony.
To the Committee on Justice.
House Solution 790, congratulating and commending Filipino producer Jet Tolentino, Representative Castelo.
To the Committee on Rules.
Committee report number 123 and House Bill number 5082.
To the Committee on Rules. Majority Floor Leader.
Madam Speaker, I move that we resume our consideration of House Bill number 4727, reported in Committee Report number 47. And for this purpose, kindly direct the Secretary General to read the title of the measure.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved. The Secretary General is directed to read the title of the bill.
House Bill number 4727, an act imposing the death penalty on certain heinous crimes, repealing for the purpose of Act number 9346, entitled an act prohibiting the imposition of death penalty in the Philippines, and amending Act number 3815 as amended, otherwise known as the Revised Penal Code and other special penal laws.
Majority Floor Leader.
Madam Speaker, the parliamentary status is that we are in the period of debate, of sponsorship and debate. And for this purpose, I move that we recognize the gentleman from the 2nd District of Capiz, the Honorable Fredenil Castro, to sponsor the bill.
The Honorable Castro is recognized.
First, to interpolate today, Madam Speaker, I move that we recognize the gentleman from Akbayan, the Honorable Tom Villarin.
The Honorable Congressman Villarin of Party List Akbayan is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Majority Leader. Colleagues, good afternoon. Would a distinguished sponsor yield to an interpellation on this very extraordinary measure?
It is always an honor to be interpellated by the distinguished gentleman from the Party List Akbayan, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First, let me make a prefatory statement, Madam Speaker, Your Honor. Akbayan believes that death penalty is morally, socially, and politically wrong. The right to life is supreme, and the state has no right to take away life. It is in contravention of international law and standards. Public opinion cannot be used as a pretext to impose capital punishment. Popular sovereignty has its limits and can never be used to justify the taking away of life. Public policy is a matter of evidence and not opinion. The global trend in death penalty is towards abolition, with 141 out of 190 countries abolishing it by law or practice. There are 84 countries that are signatories to the second optional protocol, including the Philippines. Despite exhaustive judicial reforms, wrongful convictions are simply not avoidable. No judiciary is mistake-free. Capital punishment is too final and irrevocable. It prohibits the justice system to correct itself and leaves no room for human error, with the gravest of consequences. Madam Speaker, Your Honor, worldwide studies show that death penalty has no deterrent effect. Statistics from countries that abolish death penalty indicate no serious increase in crime. Even our own Philippine Statistics Authority crime data showed that when death penalty was abolished, crime went down, although it ticked up when crime reporting system was put in place. The death penalty is not imposed in a just and equal way. It is often arbitrary, and the odds are stacked against the poor, the powerless, and racial, religious, ethnic, or sexual minorities. Not all victims and their family members support the death penalty. And even for those who seek it, long delays and a small percentage of executions actually carried out often cause frustrations and delay closure. Lastly, Madam Speaker, as long as the death penalty exists, those in power can misuse it to target particular social groups or their political opponents. Now, I will proceed to my questions, Madam Speaker. Distinguished sponsor, the primary duty of the state is to protect the life of its people. Is it not?
Yes, my dear colleague.
So if it is yes, distinguished sponsor, we have this Bill of Rights protecting our citizens from the state. But death penalty is state-sanctioned murder. It is not an act of self-defense against an immediate threat to life. It is the premeditated killing of a prisoner who is already secured inside a penitentiary. Distinguished sponsor, why do we kill people? To show that killing people is wrong.
We do not kill people. We deliver justice to those who were victimized and those who were killed by criminals, those who were aggrieved by criminals. We deliver justice to the aggrieved parties, and it is an act of self-defense in accordance with the provision of the Constitution.
Again, as I've mentioned, distinguished sponsor, Madam Speaker, it is very specific in our own Constitution that the protection of life is supreme. But the sponsors are arguing under Section 19, Article 3, that Congress has the power to impose the death penalty, but unless for compelling reasons involving heinous crimes. Madam Speaker, distinguished sponsor, can I ask you a personal question, distinguished sponsor?
You may, as you want, Madam Speaker.
In 2006, distinguished sponsor, when you voted for the abolition of the death penalty, is the definition of a heinous crime different from our definition now of a heinous crime?
It's still the same, Madam Speaker.
So, there is no distinction. There is no change in standards of a heinous crime as in 2006 as well as now.
For sure, Madam Speaker, if there is no change in standard, it's still the same.
So now you are pointing out that it is only the factor of compelling reasons that now matters why you are pushing for the reimposition of the death penalty. Is that correct?
Compelling reason is simply an element why death penalty in accordance with the Constitution should be reimposed. It is not the only element and the only consideration why Congress, in its exercise of plenary powers, could reimpose death penalty on the basis of the provision of the Constitution.
I will not argue the fact, distinguished sponsor, that Congress has the powers. But I think the more important question is, should we impose it? Is the death penalty in line with the purpose of our state and our values as a society?
Madam Speaker, the question of the distinguished gentleman from the party list Akbayan has been repeatedly asked by previous interpellators. But for the sake and for his satisfaction, let me say that it is to be reimposed because of the crime, gruesome crime that is heinous, crime that has shocked the morality and even the minimum standard of acceptable norms under a civilized society like our country, the Republic of the Philippines. Madam Speaker, my distinguished colleague.
So, distinguished sponsor, Madam Speaker, it is now the argument of the state, the moral argument supposedly of the state, that it has to invoke, to assert its state legitimacy over a supposed increased wave of crime. But in the end, I think, distinguished sponsor, Madam Speaker, it has to show evidence that lives were saved because we used the death penalty. And that evidence, Madam Speaker, distinguished sponsor, has never been proven in the past, nor it can be proven in the future.
Again, Madam Speaker, I'm sorry to say that the question of the distinguished gentleman from Akbayan has been recycled and recycled by different interpellators. But nonetheless, let me address the concern of the distinguished gentleman that even the Constitution does not require that there should be a surge of heinous crimes committed in our country before Congress could exercise its plenary power to reimpose the penalty of death.
Well, I respect the obiter dictum of the distinguished sponsor. Now may I proceed to my next question. Again, distinguished sponsor, is the death penalty, in your own personal opinion, morally justified?
Madam Speaker, my distinguished colleague, the reimposition of death penalty or any penalty for that matter is not based on any moral compulsion. Neither it is based on any moral consideration, but it is based on norms of conduct that will have to be observed in a civilized society like the Republic of the Philippines, and the task of the government or the state to deliver justice to those who have committed injustice in our society. That is the very basis of reimposition of death penalty, to deliver justice to the victims, to deliver what is due to the victims, to deliver what is appropriate under circumstances.
Well, Madam Speaker, I also beg to disagree what the distinguished sponsor has
Madam
said.
Speaker, the
Because morally, Mr.
gentleman
Madam
could
Speaker,
always disagree, but I will always insist that moral consideration is not a consideration for purposes of determining
Madam Speaker,
the delivery,
the right to life,
reimposition
the right
of death
to life
penalty.
is a moral question, Madam Speaker.
What we question here, Madam
Now,
Speaker, is the
can I
Constitution,
proceed, Madam Speaker,
whether
to
it
my
is
next
allowed
question?
by the Constitution, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, can I proceed to my next question? Again, it has been argued by the sponsors that death penalty is a deterrent to the commission of crimes. Is that correct, distinguished sponsor?
I do not say that it is a deterrent, but what I say is that even the Constitution does not require that it should be a deterrent. What only the Constitution requires is that it should be reimposed against heinous crime on the basis of compelling reason.
Then again, distinguished sponsor, Madam Speaker, if it is not for deterrence, so we are now reimposing the death penalty purely for vengeance alone, purely to get back at the alleged criminal or the suspect.
Vengeance, Madam Speaker, has never been mentioned in any of the answers of the sponsors. Neither has the word vengeance seen in the language of the Constitution or any law for that matter. That penalty is being sought to be reimposed because it is power given to the plenary power given to the House of Representatives or Congress of the country as a whole, because it is needed in order to administer justice, to deliver justice, and to protect the norms of conduct that has been established in a civilized society like ours
Madam
for the
Speaker.
benefit of the majority.
Madam Speaker, when we make public policy, it is evidence-based. It is based on reason and scientific data. That's why I am questioning, I am beleaguered, why the sponsors would always insist that it is not incumbent upon passing this reimposition of the death penalty that we look at the hard data. I think this is very, for me, nakakabahala ho ito, Madam Speaker. In fact, what the distinguished sponsor mentioned was also said during the committee hearings. In fact, the DOJ, particularly the Secretary of Justice, when asked for proof about death penalty being a deterrent against crime, he stated, and I will quote, "I have no studies that the death penalty is a deterrent, but I would be deterred if I knew I would be killed." I don't see any logic or reason for that argument, Madam Speaker. And similarly, the Philippine National Police, when asked for a position paper, the representative said in the hearing, quote, "No certainty that death penalty will reduce or deter the commission of future crime, especially drugs. If we look at it just as a deterrence, it will fail." Again, Madam Speaker, distinguished sponsor, the issue we now are facing here is we are now making a law whose objective is not really the deterrence of the commission of any future crimes. We want to pass a law just because we want it, or just because it is being demanded of us to pass this law. I think we should look deeper. We should think about this, Madam Speaker. Now, I will proceed to the substance of the proposed House Bill 4727, Madam Speaker. In the proposed bill, it listed 21 offenses or crimes punishable by death penalty, ranging from treason, parricide, infanticide, and other offenses in the revised penal code, technically called index crimes, whose punishment is reclusion perpetua. There are also special laws, technically called non-index crimes, on plunder, carnapping, and violations of the Dangerous Drugs Act. Are all the mentioned cases, distinguished sponsor, be imposed the mandatory death penalty?
Madam Speaker, distinguished colleague, I think the gentleman from Akbayan is asking the wrong question. Because if the gentleman from Akbayan will go over the proposed bill or the proposed legislation, it states there reclusion perpetua to death. By the fact that the penalty of reclusion perpetua is there, meaning to say that the penalty is not mandatory.
So there are no offenses that are punishable by mandatory death penalty under the proposed measure, distinguished sponsor.
Well, if the gentleman from Akbayan has read the bill, perhaps he himself can answer his own question. There is no
Madam
mandatory death penalty.
I think I have to correct the distinguished sponsor. In House Bill 4727, qualified bribery, which is Article 221, the revised penal code, the penalty is mandatory death. In aggravated rape, qualified rape, Article 266, it states here in the bill that the penalty is death. And so are the crimes punishable under the Dangerous Drugs Act. So there are offenses under this proposed bill that are punishable by mandatory death penalty. Anyway, Madam Sponsor, distinguished sponsor, mandatory death penalty for the information of this body is deemed as highly arbitrary and illegal. It has been decided in our international laws that mandatory death penalty, being arbitrary and illegal, has no place in a modern and civilized society. Now, let me direct the distinguished sponsor to offenses, drug-related offenses. Is it the opinion now of this body that all drug-related offenses should be imposed the mandatory death penalty.
It is not opinion. Opinion is only good for purposes of discussion. Opinion is only good for purposes of interpellation. But rather it is the intention of the proponents or the sponsor of the bill to do away with mandatory death penalty and instead to give our courts the option between death and reclusion perpetua. With that intention or with that direction being adopted by the proponents of the proposed legislation, then this representation would say that the mandatory of death is no longer being eyed by the proponents or sponsor of this proposed legislation.
Well, distinguished sponsor, Madam Speaker, I am happy to note not about that new development because it is not in this bill. But again, this representation, Madam Speaker, distinguished sponsor, would still argue that in this proposed legislation, any death penalty is wrong. And it has been proven, especially on drug-related cases, that this is a complex crime, if I may say, Madam Speaker.
I will never deprive the distinguished gentleman from Akbayan of his opinion that death penalty is wrong. In the same way that the distinguished gentleman from Akbayan will not deprive us, the proponents and the sponsors of the proposed legislation, in invoking the provision of the Constitution, in trying to seek the support of the members of the House to reimpose the death penalty.
Well, again, focusing on drug-related offenses, Madam Speaker, distinguished sponsor. In major studies, global studies, death penalty for drug offenders, it is said, takes on a risk-reward equation. Economic theory suggests that market dynamics and the parameters will be sensitive to executions, imprisonment, and other forms of punishment. In simple words, distinguished sponsor, drug traffickers would exact higher prices for drugs due to the high risk and scarcity of the drug, due to the threat of severe punishment. Likewise, production, importation, and distribution of drugs will be lower in areas where such threats of arrest and punishment are high. That's the assumption, Madam Speaker, distinguished sponsor. Likewise, if executions for drug crimes are a deterrent, availability of drugs will decline over time as executions for drug crimes increase. Without the death penalty, it is said, drugs would flood the market and prices will go down based on simple economic theory on scarcity. Now, does the distinguished sponsor have the hard data to say, to back up, that by imposing death penalty on drug-related offenses committed by, we could say, these very criminal elements in our society, would that again deter crime? Would that reduce the supply of drugs?
Again, Madam Speaker, at the expense of being repetitious, let me say that deterrence or the word deterrence is never mentioned in the language of the Constitution. What the sponsors and proponents of the proposed legislation is banking was that the state could not be left defenseless against crimes sourced from or as a result of drug trafficking in this country. The state should not be left defenseless against the absurds of drugs trafficking in this country, as well as the propensity of all drug traffickers to destroy our society.
Madam Speaker, distinguished sponsor, I too am also against illicit drugs, the trading, sale, manufacture, and the distribution of drugs. But again, what is in my mind and in my heart is still the question, how many drug offenders, criminals, we say, would we execute so that we would erase the drug menace permanently in a society? Can we have that sureness that if by eliminating all drug offenders who has been convicted, punished by the court, imprisoned, would deter the commission of future crimes, drug-related crimes? I think, again, data will show that it has not. In the 2012 United Nations World Drug Report, showed that in regions where drug executions are most frequent, availability, meaning that measured by volume of drug seizures, has either remained stable or increased compared to the previous reporting period. Prices of drugs in countries like China, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam have either remained stable or increased as executions are carried out. Again, drug prices appear to be disconnected from punishment risks, including the death penalty. Moreover, imprisoned or executed traffickers are often quickly replaced in the drug market, where such is deeply integrated at a macro level into both national and regional economies. So this United Nations report, Madam Speaker, speaks about the futility of capital punishment as a response to the drug problem. And even to quote leaders of various nations who are in the ambit of the illicit drug trade. And I may quote President Enrique Peña Nieto, the President of Mexico. We understand, as few others can, the limitations and painful implications of the imminently prohibitionist paradigm. The war against drugs that started in the 70s has not inhibited the production, traffic, or consumption of drugs in the world. We must move beyond prohibition to effective prevention. That was delivered in a speech before the United Nations General Assembly Special Session on Drug Policy last April 19, 2016. And in Thailand, just near our border, Thailand launched an equally popular war on drugs in 2003 that killed about 2,800 people in 3 months. But figures show it has no lasting impact on meth supply or demand in Thailand. And according to the Justice Minister of Thailand, Paibon Komchaya, last July 2016, the world has lost the war on drugs, not only Thailand. And even its constitutional court has stated the justice system, including the imposition of death penalty, is not reducing the number of criminals. Instead, it is producing new traffickers and new sellers. while drug pushers are locked away, they are easily replaced by others on the streets, and those behind bars become even more efficient criminals with wider connections. What we created became more harmful and more dangerous to our people than the drug itself. Thus, it is the humble opinion of this representation, Madam Speaker, that when we talk about addressing the drug menace, let us look beyond addressing the drug menace as just a law enforcement issue. More importantly, let us treat our drug offenders as humans, addicts who have also a place in society, and they can rehabilitate themselves, Madam Speaker, distinguished sponsor. Now again, let me direct the distinguished sponsor to his sponsorship speech, in which he enumerated 26 so-called heinous crimes. In the 26 cases mentioned, the perpetrators have only been arrested in 17 of the 26 cases, and there has been a conviction of one of the 2 cases. This may be slightly unfair to the distinguished sponsor because many of the cases he cited were from January of this year. So I would not bother to discuss each of the 26 cases. But again, based on my rudimentary sampling of the 26 cases enumerated by the distinguished sponsor, I would like to point out one case resulted in the conviction of a certain Rolando Talban, a poor man convicted of carnapping with murder. He maintained his innocence but was convicted largely on eyewitness testimony. He was arrested in 2011 and convicted in 2015. Secondly, our law requires conviction beyond reasonable doubt. But again, this can be easily manufactured and manipulated. Crimes are committed to hide the intention and identity of the perpetrators. In our country, the courts rely heavily on eyewitness testimony rather than forensic evidence. Psychologists tell us that stress of crime scenes and the witnesses' pressure makes eyewitness testimony not so reliable. That's why even in the US, when DNA testing was introduced, 70% of exonerated inmates originally convicted based on eyewitnesses' testimony. Again, I would also like to highlight the infamous and sordid cases of the Ampatuan massacre. This case has dragged on for years and years, Madam Speaker, distinguished sponsor. And because the involved, the accused, are rich, they can hire the services of lawyers, including, of course, our Presidential Legal Counsel, Salvador Panelo. The other cases also mentioned, there are issues, policy issues that should be looked into. But again, I would not divert away from other policy issues that should also be looked into under our criminal justice system. Now, distinguished sponsor, I would like to talk about death penalties' disproportionate impact on the poor. It was the opinion of the committee chair and distinguished sponsor, Representative Umali, during his sponsorship and interpellation, that it is impossible that an innocent person would be put to death. Now, does the distinguished sponsor know of any perpetrators who were wrongfully convicted?
Madam Speaker, distinguished colleague, before I answer the question of my dear colleague, this representation would just like to say that he cannot comment on the interpellator's recital of Mexico because this representation is not interested of something or anything about Mexico. Neither will this representation comment on the matter he mentioned about Thailand because it is not the concern of this representation to dwell on the matter affecting Thailand. Neither will this representation comment on the other countries that he mentioned because the problem being discussed in this House is not the problem of other countries, but rather the problem of the Republic of the Philippines. Therefore, any opinion which may have been expressed by my distinguished colleague from the party list Akbayan does not merit any response from this representation, as I believe that they are immaterial in our discussion, most especially if they involve opinion or assumption for that matter.
But I beg to disagree, distinguished sponsor, Madam Speaker. We live in a community of nations, and it is important that we also learn from the mistakes of our neighbors so we won't commit our own mistakes in the future. Now, again, I would like to direct the distinguished sponsor to my earlier question. Does the distinguished sponsor know of any perpetrator or perpetrators who were wrongfully convicted by Philippine courts?
Madam Speaker, distinguished colleague, this representation is a member of the House of Representatives. He has never been member of the judiciary, for which reason he could not be privy to any trial being done in the Court of Justice of the Republic of the Philippines that would make him competent to discuss whether he is or he is knowledgeable of any person who has been convicted wrongfully by the courts. What he can only say is that on the basis of decisions rendered by the lower courts which were reversed by the Supreme Court, perhaps he could say that the decision of the lower court were erroneous and the conviction of the accused in the lower court was wrong and erroneous because this decision were reversed by the Supreme Court on appeal.
So thank you for that information, distinguished sponsor, that there were indeed cases, erroneous or wrongful conviction, reversed by our Supreme Court. And as what was stated before in a 2004 study and also articulated in the People versus Mateo case, that indeed 71.7% of cases, death penalty cases, elevated for review to the Supreme Court were reversed by the High Court. And in particular, distinguished sponsor, because as a legislator, we need to do our homework, to do research. I found out about this very interesting case of Marlon Paraso. Marlon Paraso, a deaf-mute and mentally retarded person, was meted the death sentence in 1995 for rape and attempted homicide. The court that tried this case never bothered to ensure that he understood the proceedings against him. his multiple disabilities notwithstanding, were never mentioned in court, not even by his court-appointed lawyer. His sentence was affirmed by the Supreme Court in 1997. Again, his sentence of death penalty was affirmed by the Supreme Court in 1997. But taking up his case, the Free Legal Assistance Group was able to have the High Court reverse itself in 1999. Without the intervention of FLAG, Marlon certainly would have been killed. So again, the question is, how many more like him would be wrongfully executed, not because they committed crimes, but because they cannot afford access to a good lawyer? So again, death penalty affects the poor, and poverty is equivalent also to poor lawyering. Again, distinguished sponsor. Now, I will direct the distinguished sponsor to the economic impact of the death penalty. But before going that, again, it was mentioned in my prefatory statement, Madam Speaker, distinguished sponsor. I said that the general trend in the global community is towards abolition. And according to the UN Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights, death penalty has been abolished by law or de facto in 141 states. Likewise, executions took place in just 25 countries in year 2015, down by more than a third from 42 countries that carried on executions in 1995. Europe has only 2 countries, Belarus and Kazakhstan, that authorize capital punishment. The Vatican State abolished death penalty in 1967. In the United States, the last bastion of capital punishment in the West, executions were carried out in only 6 states in 2015, and fewer death sentences have been imposed as compared in the past. In our own ASEAN region, Madam Speaker, distinguished sponsor, let me point out that the ASEAN states are split on the employment of death penalty. But the going trend is that many are now looking at the abolition of death penalty. Indonesia, which has more than 300 nationals on death row in other countries, voted to abstain in the use of death penalty last December 2016. Indonesians, of which one of our countrymen, Mary Jane Veloso, is now imprisoned. Thankfully, she has not been executed, seek the mercy and compassion for their nationals. And oftentimes in Indonesia, it leads to intense emotional outbursts. The Philippines, our own country, Madam Speaker, distinguished sponsor, we have around 82 OFWs in death row in other countries. And now we are planning to reimpose the death penalty. Can we again go through this emotion-laden, emotion-intense argument that we need to save our OFWs from a death sentence in other countries, while we, in our own country, will be reimposing the death penalty? Again, we could say that it is beyond the Congress powers or the Congress plenary powers to look into these matters, as it belongs to the executive. But we are making laws, we are making legislation. And public policy would involve Congress looking into the implications of policies that will be made in this chamber. Again, the issue of our reimposition would violate our international treaty obligations. It has been discussed by previous interpellators, Madam Speaker, distinguished sponsor, so I would not delve into that. But again, we can see that violating international agreements would really have an effect on our country, especially on the Philippines. And for that, I would just cite, Madam Speaker, distinguished sponsor, that now the Philippines enjoys a privileged status with the European Union under the Generalized System of Preferences Plus. And one of the prerequisites of us entering into such trade agreement is the abolition of the death penalty. Our current GSP Plus status, meaning Philippines have tariff-free sales to the EU for over 6,200 kind of products. And these products include fruit, coconut oil, footwear, fish, textiles, and this translates into tens of millions of euros annually saved in customs duties. And mainly, the beneficiary of our GSP trading status with the European Union are Mindanaoans, our very own tuna industry. In fact, if we lose this GSP Plus trade status, and this data is our own data, we will lose up to 200,000 jobs in agriculture and manufacturing, especially in Mindanao. But again, the question is, what's in return? We impose death penalty and we lose millions. In fact, based on our Philippine export sales to the European Union, in 2015, when the Philippines had a full year of GSP Plus status, exports jumped 6.8% to $7.17 billion. The European Union is the Philippines' fourth largest trading partner and fourth largest export market, accounting for 11.56% of total Philippine exports. So, in effect, if now we will reimpose the death penalty and will violate the second optional protocol, and it will affect our GSP Plus international trading status, we will lose roughly around $12.8 billion in bilateral trade. Anong kapalit? Wala. Patayan. Executions. Again, death penalty goes beyond. We could again say that Congress leaves it to the executive to look for other sources or means of trade, or we could have trading partners. We could go to China, pero ang China, binabarat naman tayo. So again, this death penalty bill has implications that goes beyond what is the intended. Now, again, let me wind up my interpellation, Madam Speaker, distinguished sponsor. I would again go back to what the distinguished sponsor said, that deterrence is not one of the objective of this proposed measure. The explanatory note of House Bill number 1 used as basis, was used as basis for the committee bill, House Bill 4727, and I quote, "Our criminal justice system has to make do with penal laws that are perceived to be less than dissuasive. There is evidently a need to reinvigorate the war against criminality by reviving a proven deterrent coupled by its consistent, persistent, and determined implementation." Again, as I've said, in the proposed measure, it has been mentioned, and even in our committee hearings, that deterrence simply is one of the objective of this bill. And again, we need to remind this august body that we do not make laws just only for the sake that this is being needed and demanded of us due to political expediency. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, distinguished sponsor, for your time.
Madam Speaker, in reaction to the discourse of the gentleman from Akbayan, this representation is lost and confused because the gentleman from Akbayan has discoursed of volumes of recycled issues and matters that have already been discussed by previous sponsors and interpellators, but he has not posed any question. In any event, Madam Speaker, distinguished colleague, as in by way of reaction to the discourse of the gentleman from Akbayan, let me invoke the previous answers of the previous sponsors to the same questions and the same issues raised by other interpellators prior to the gentleman, distinguished gentleman from Akbayan. Madam Speaker, and thank you, distinguished gentleman from Akbayan, and it will always be a pleasure to be interpellated by an interpellator like you. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Congressman Villarin.
Madam Speaker,
Congressman Atienza.
we at this point would like to move to adjourn because we do not see any more enough members interested in the topic. So we move to adjourn.
Majority Floor Leader.
Madam Speaker, I would normally object because we would want the people in the gallery to be afforded the opportunity to listen to the arguments. But in deference to the senior deputy minority leader, I join his motion that we adjourn until tomorrow, February 22 at 4 in the afternoon, Wednesday.
Session adjourned until tomorrow, 4 o'clock, February 22.
Ayos.